Good evening, Santa Cruz. Welcome to Voices from the Village, Community Television's long-running public affairs talk program with your input. That's right. And I am your host, Sandino Gomez. We're going to be joined tonight with two lovely ladies that will be talking about some very important topics in relation to their recent trip to the United Nations to talk about the Commission on the Status of Women. Before we get into that, though, let me just say really quick, before we get into that, I want to make sure that you all know that community television is going to be having a fundraising telethon on June 28th and 29th. That's a Friday and a Saturday night from 6 to 9 p.m. It's going to be live. There will be comedy, music, entertainment, shenanigans, hijinks, and all sorts of fun stuff. So please, bring your checkbooks, your wallets, plant yourself right in front of the television, and enjoy 3 hours of awesome community-supported fundraising to keep this program and all programs like it here on community television on the air in the coming years. We do need your support, so please, 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 June 28th, 29th, our telethon. All commercial plugs aside, let's get into tonight's topic with our two guests, Jane Weed-Pomerantz, a former mayor of Santa Cruz and currently working as the lead trainer for the Positive Discipline Association. And also a member of WILPF, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, one of the oldest peace and justice organizations in the United States, continually running since before suffrage and right up until today. So that's a pretty amazing legacy, WILPF's 90-plus years of organizing. Next to Jane, we have Nia Shima-Franklin. She's a UCSC Senior studying sociology as her major, and works with the SAFE program, which is an acronym standing for Sexual Assaults, Facts, and Education. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. No. So let's just launch right into it. Like, what are we talking about tonight? I mean, I said it, United Nations Status of Women, but like...
Well, this was the 57th year of the Commission on the Status of Women, held at the United Nations. And each year, they have a particular theme that they like to address. And there were 6,000 people in attendance.
Wow.
There were about 3 different levels of workshops going on and UN briefings. And it was an amazing opportunity to learn about what the governments for sure, but mostly the non-governmental organizations around the world are doing. And that was one of my great takeaways. I think Nia and I share that wow, we can be really grateful for the awesome work that legions of people are doing out there. Yeah. This was just the agenda for the 2 weeks of which we were at week 1.
That's like a textbook.
It is a textbook, and so there were so many options. It was very much a challenge to decide where we were going to be when, in order to take advantage of the experience. I was there as a delegate with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom local to global program. I was one of 6 women in the U.S., and we were sort of the venerable old activists that had been involved for several decades, and kind of mentor role to the Practicum, which I'll let Nia talk more about.
Yeah, I was in, as Jane said, the Practicum, which is a cohort of 16 young women who are in a university. So basically I applied and I got in, and I had the opportunity to be mentored by people like Jane and also to attend all of these workshops, which, as she said, varied very extensively from how women are impacted by environmental conflict and also conflict and war, and looked at different regions of the world to see how different women are affected in different regions. And so it was just a really amazing opportunity to see all of these people who are making active change for the advancement of women's rights, who have been doing this for as long as I've been alive. And I was surrounded by young, amazing women who were also doing their own sorts of change.
It's important to say that each year has a theme for the Commission on the Status of Women. This year's theme was the elimination and prevention of all forms of violence against women and girls. I say children. And that is a heavy subject.
Certainly. And unfortunately a very prevalent one. I mean, in both our larger society as well as a lot of our institutions, you just see so many incidences of assault, and the sad part is like most of it does go unreported. You know, I know there's been a lot of headlines in the United States recently around sexual assault in the military, and kind of that legacy that's there, and sort of the heat that's on the Pentagon and other military officials to address the problem in a significant way. You know, I think the number was it went from 19,000 to 26,000 sexual assaults in the military in 1 year, which is just a huge increase, but also, you know, terrifying that it works out to some huge number per day.
Yeah, that was one of the focuses of the conference. A lot of workshops dealt with hypermasculinization and militarization, and how that is connected to violence against women. And that's one of the goals of WILPF, is to connect those two and kind of analyze how women are affected by conflict. And there were a lot of like really hard things to listen to, but then there are also like a lot of people who are trying to create change within this structure of masculinity, and try to create avenues for an alternative, alternative masculinities, which also affect men as well as women positively, because if there's an alternative masculinity, then there's less violence in general for both genders.
Like super hyper masculine men, you know, they don't just pick on women. Like I could certainly say I felt victimized a lot in high school especially, but you know, all throughout my educational career by a couple really hyper masculine guys who just saw me as an easy, weak target. No, bullying, absolutely.
This is an international level of bullying, but it's definitely the case. And what I think struck me was when you think about the continuum of conflict, or a continuum of respectful relationships, or however you want to see that, there's individuals, and then societies, and then nation states that are all at a different place on that continuum.
Certainly.
So the solutions, or even the analysis, would be different for different people in the absolute midst of conflict, versus those that are post-conflict, versus those who are becoming stabilized and then rebuilding their civil society. So there's no one way that fits it, and I know there's a vast cadre of people that are working on the rule of law, very important, and having judges in place and holding court, but that's a very small piece of what needs to happen, because
inadequate, certainly.
Impunity, and then just shifting the mindset. As a sociologist, and then as an Adlerian psychologist myself, what we're looking at is rebuild brain function, how you rebuild trust, how you rebuild communication, power with versus power over, all of these interesting and changing dynamics in the world.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something that affects everyone. You know, violence against women is not just violence against women. And, you know, I want to state that it really is something that men need to address, and kind of that role that men play in changing other men, you know, and to not tolerate sexual violence or assault or anything from your friends, to not hide or cover up or kind of condone or look the other way. But, you know, I'm just kind of curious, like, the role, or like the kind of ally role that men can play in this, I guess, is sort of.
Well, while I was at the conference, I was talking to a woman from Sweden who worked in like cooperation with a sports club, and her organization would work with the leaders of the sports club and train them in violence against women and issues and prevention, and then those leaders would then be delegated to train the young men who were participating in the sports clubs.
Cool.
So that's like a way where you can introduce violence, prevention of violence against women in a way that is not like scary or kind of attacking men, because they're learning from other men. So I think that's like one, and that's what a lot of workshops we're talking about, is training men to talk to other men about just making it part of the conversation rather than just like attacking.
Certainly.
Yeah, it's a real shift in the international movement, is realizing that men as allies are important. So men as allies can be, whether it's the next door neighbors. And we in this hour before we end, we want to show some YouTubes for people to see some examples of what are being done.
Everyone loves the YouTube.
stand up, the role of the bystander.
Yeah.
And becoming an upstander, and anybody can do that. And so realizing that men play a critical role in this, and rather either or, it's more both and.
Yeah.
And, but we have to also realize that none of this can come about until we begin to shift the priorities of where funds are spent on the planet.
Oh, geez.
And we need to realize that just 1 year of military expenditures globally is about the equivalent of 600 years of a budget, the general fund of the United Nations.
Wow.
600 years in 1 year spent on armaments. The out of control arms dealerships or arms trade all over the world is exacerbating and making worse the problem everywhere. And then that goes hand in hand with the extended nature of militarization everywhere. I mean, whether it's a surveillance culture, or whether it's military bases, or whether it's just the militias. The notion that there are so many weapons out there that even schools in Africa, for recess, they put down their machine guns and then go play soccer. But then they go back, pick up their machine guns, and go on with their day, because it's such a tool in their day-to-day. You gotta admit, that's just a little bit insane.
Terrifying.
People need water, they need food, they need jobs, they need shelter. Those basics are very, very cheap compared to what we spend on arms.
Certainly. Is there any video in particular you guys want to, maybe before we get into some of the good news and the bad news about what you learned at the conference, are there any of the videos you'd like to show?
Jane?
There is one that helps us put this into historical context.
Okay.
And again, this might be something that if you have been a victim of assault or abuse yourself, you might want to have a friend there with you, or if there are children, you might want to divert them a little bit to think about this. But there is a wonderful documentary. This is a very small excerpt that is developed, Within Every Woman, and it documents the aftermath of women who were part of the systematic rape of over 200,000 young girls during the Japanese occupation during World War II. These were the comfort women, and they are now grandmothers. And this legacy is important to understand because it's not isolated. We think this happened in a war years ago.
Yeah, but it's not.
But it's happening right now.
Yeah.
So this is a really quick view of hearing from those women about that time. Okay.
Well, I just want to remind our audience, this is a call-in show, so get those phones ready. If you have a response to what you're about to see, please call us up at 425-8844. But we'll be right back after this excerpt from Within Every Woman.
Ang mga sundalo, araw-araw sila, nagakanta sila araw-araw. Na-memorize ko. Tapos,
I kept on crying, and I was already bleeding.
I was crying, Lord, I cannot do anything, Lord. So help me, help me.
일본 사람들 끌려갔어.
13 mo. One Japanese soldier raped me, one after another. I cried for hours, kneeling down, asking him, please, sir, help me, let me go free.
There were so many. There were 10 soldiers I'm still crying and crying and praying, praying. My Lord, help me, Lord. What the mama? You had to cut him. Cut him, you know that. Such a
I hit the Japanese shoulder. She ripped my mother.
These women could have easily been my own grandmother. This continues to happen, cloaked in a different name.
They always visit our room, open the door, whatever they do. If they want to rape you, they will rape you.
It's so wrong that the English language doesn't have words to describe it.
All of things was put in secret.
It just makes me think about how many other stories are never told.
Close your lips, do not talk.
And continue to be silenced.
The women who are still alive to talk about it today still do not get the justice that they deserved.
That time, it's really a great shame as a woman to be raped.
It says something about our world when a woman can't speak up about the traumas that she's been forced through.
Sometimes you remember what had happened to you. You can never forget that memo.
Within
Every woman.
Within every woman, 이야기가 있습니다. There's a story.
Hay una historia.
There's a story.
Story.
There's a story.
There's a story.
Without borders, I like that. There you have it, folks. A small, powerful excerpt from the film Within Every Woman, dealing with the kind of institutionalized mass rape of the victims of, Japanese military aggression in World War II. Any reactions or anything you want to say more about that before we move on? Or?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to realize that this is not an isolated incident. This happens all over, and it happens today. In Mexico, since 1993, over 500 women have been killed related to the fact that they were women, not anything that they did, and largely the murders go unreported and uninvestigated. And then in the Democratic Republic of Congo, at least 200,000 cases of sexual assault have happened. And in Bosnia, during the conflict in the late 90s, an estimated 20,000 women were raped. Wow. So this is like an epidemic of violence against women that really needs to be discussed, and active engagement needs to be taken.
And like, essentially militarized violence against women, really. I mean, we're talking about, armed, kind of the result of having such hyper-masculine, armed to the teeth, crazed militaries so worldwide, and not just ours, but all of the militaries worldwide. Jane had this beautiful graphic, about how many billions of dollars are spent every day on armament as people go hungry, people go without water, people go without decent shelter, healthcare, education. It's so insane.
Yeah.
It really is, and I think you cut right to it. Our priorities. It's about our priorities and how we choose to spend our money. I really do not like the austerity dialogue that we don't have enough money.
Right.
There's billions of dollars floating around the world, trillions of dollars floating around the world. We don't have money. That's a false argument.
Well, and I have to say that the militarization, the hyper-masculinization, the proliferation of arms, conflict in general rather than problem solving, are definitely have impacts on women. This conference also highlighted other critical factors that are happening for girls and women. And some of that is culturally based and outdated, whether it's female genital mutilation, whether it's the honor killings, whether it's child brides. All of those kinds of issues also need to be raised, and in some ways it's not for us to raise here in the United States, but for us to support the women that are raising it in their own places and in their own countries. And I think Nia and I both came away feeling very positive, maybe me especially, because I'm one of the WILPF people in the United States that is worried that where's the next generation? Well, guess what? It's alive and well and empowered and all over the planet doing the work. I mean, we'll come back to that, but that's critical to realize that we need to work in solidarity with those organizations that are questioning and moving towards reprioritization. In this country, we can work on what our own nation does.
Certainly.
And we can put pressure on issues of the austerity packages. I mean, you raised it yourself. The deep and enduring global economic crisis is creating havoc. Because where we were looking at women's empowerment, with cottage industry and things like that, it's in danger now because of the huge cutbacks. And then the austerity, we know, is just, it's not the way to grow an economy or fix an infrastructure or anything like that. And then we have to look at global climate change and severe weather forces forcing migration and dislocation.
Well, you're going to lead to more violence against women as they're forced to migrate, uprooted from their communities, lose their support networks and their resources, I'm sure.
All of those are things that we need to be keeping in mind. And that women only earn a fraction of what men earn all over the planet. In the United States, it's 70 cents out of every dollar.
77 or
77
so.
cents.
I experienced that myself at a previous local employer, which I will be nice enough to leave unnamed, but he started me at $9 an hour, and a woman that had been working there for like almost 2 years got started. She asked me what I made when I came on. What's he starting you at? And she was making 8 after 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that happens, and it happens right here in this town. So people want to act like, oh, it's a problem over there. No, this is here.
And then there's the perpetuation of the quote-unquote patriarchy, where women are excluded from civil society and are just not at the table. So that's part of the demands that are coming up.
Well, I'm glad they're at this table.
Thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely.
And the idea of girls getting education and education being equally accessible to all is, I think, something that we can all jump on.
Certainly. Well, I want to remind our viewers this is a live call-in show, so please do feel free to pick up that phone. If you have a question for Jane or Nia, you can call us at 425-8844. That's here in the 831 area code. And again, our topic tonight is just kind of the status of women worldwide. The United Nations just held its commission on the status of women, and these two were lucky enough to attend, and they're telling us all about it. So why don't we get into a little bit of like what you learned at the conference, since you were there. This is an amazing manual you have. I'm sure there were some great things that you learned, and why don't you share some of, why don't we start with the good news, eh? And
no, we're going to start with the bad news.
Okay, never mind.
We want to end with the good news.
That's better, you're right.
Do you want to go into a little bit of the bad news?
Well, I've been sort of detailing some of the issues, and I think that one of the issues that's coming up at college campuses and police departments, and even my husband's a former firefighter, and his union just put out a memo about the seriousness of human trafficking.
Yeah, wow.
And this is one thing, there's a wonderful movie, and Nia can describe some more about it, that was called The Whistleblower, that appeared on the movie theaters just a couple years ago. And it chronicled what the United Nations, the culpability of the United Nations and the impunity that they had, the peacekeepers in the Bosnian conflict or the post-conflict time, were actually the perpetrators themselves. So this is another kind of a red flag for us to be aware of. But what interests me in that story is that as the Soviet Empire, or the USSR, broke up, all of those republics were then sort of hit hard economically.
Certainly.
And the black market came in, and poverty was the name of the game. And there was a lot of pipelines for weapons that went to the Bosnian War. There were huge networks of to traffic the weapons. And instead of weapons after the conflict, It was young women that were being trafficked from Eastern Europe. And that was one little microcosm. We now know that there are probably 20 million or so laborers trafficked in the world, and around 5 million of those are sexual slaves. And the memo in my husband's firefighter magazine today talked about how this is an industry that is illegal, criminal, and worldwide, that is probably around $30 to $40 billion a year.
There's a huge industry based on women's bodies too, not even just the sexual trafficking, but I mean, you know, the beauty industry, which I really have a problem with, but you know, just everything. I mean, like, women's bodies are so objectified and used to sell products or ideas, whatever it is. I mean, it's
yeah, I mean, Jane was saying that, like, Bosnia was a really horrible case where women were literally commodities, turned into commodities, and I think it's important to look at how easily that can happen, because Bosnia, unfortunately, now has this kind of stereotype of being known for this horrible human trafficking that happened for years. But before the conflict, Bosnia was actually very egalitarian in the way that it treated women, and women were often like leaders and were in the Air Force. But just, I think it's important, and something that WILPF really strives to achieve, is understanding gender as kind of a power structure, and how, like, it's more than just like what stereotypes that are considered for a man and for a woman, but that gender is a structure of power, and it structures who has the power in our society. And since militarization is now kind of become synonymous with masculinity, to see how that, like, structure of power is now being developed, where like arms are used against women specifically because of that structure of power.
So I got a question for y'all. This is just you talking about that kind of popped it in my head, and I just want to bounce it off you. Is this a good thing or a bad thing that women are now allowed to serve in combat alongside the boys?
Oh,
is that an advancement,
that is a very interesting question.
Do we really even want more people at all in there? Yeah.
The truth of war is important to understand. I consider myself a pacifist, so I think I have to question why women would want to be in that situation. Why anybody would want to resolve their conflicts that way. What's interesting to me, though, is to really see, and this is a discussion within at the UN Commission on the Status of Women. It was like, okay, feminists, how have we done? Yeah. We have broken some ceilings, and we are now at the tables or leading in a men's world. So we can be just as manly as a lot of men. Yeah. Is that what we really mean by feminism? Yeah. Is that what we mean by equal rights? Is that what we mean by a collective response, or problem solving with everybody's ideas, power with rather than power over? Certainly. Or are we playing a game that is a losing game? And so I don't know. How do you feel about it?
I mean, I think that I look at the question a little bit differently, because I was talking about how militarization and weaponry is associated with masculinity. So I think it's mostly dangerous for women to enter that realm, because it's a realm where they're not wanted. And so we're seeing this rise in sexual assault against women in positions where they're being more too masculine. Yeah. And so I don't think it's more that women shouldn't be in places of conflict, but that just you'd have to kind of restructure the whole way we think about what it is to be masculine, and like kind of deconstruct that to like not just equate it with arms and weapons, and that would provide a space for women, but then it would just completely, I don't know, it would be a different way to look at war.
Could we deconstruct the military instead?
Yeah.
Let's just start there.
Think about that.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Jane there. So I mean, let's continue with more. Okay. I mean, let's just say, are there any other clips, anything on this topic about the bad news, or like any other clips you'd want to show right now, or at any point, just if while we're talking, something pops up that you think is relevant and you could show on the clips, by all means, like, let's just cut to them. We have a few more left, I understand, so.
Well, we were talking also women in war, and another thing that I think is really important is that in places of conflict, why aren't women being the peacekeepers in these situations? Like, you have places of conflict, you have women experiencing a lot of the brunt of the violence, and yet there's not a lot of women who are like at the table and within civil society. And there's actually a security resolution from the UN called UNSR 1325, which mandates, and it was unanimously adopted in, I think, 2000, but it really hasn't been applied, where women are mandated to be part of the peacekeepers and like involved and politically involved in deconstructing conflict, which is something that I think would be really important to introduce that perspective.
Yeah, and the SR, the Security Resolution 1325, lays out all these great things. And let me tell you, the United Nations has an alphabet soup of all of the things that they've done all the time. And the key is that if so what, and then what? And it's the then what that is where every nation, the people of every nation need to hold their own government to the fire, feet to the fire, to make sure that they come through with rule of law, if that's the issue, or the end to impunity so that people are just walking away from it, to real representation or reparation for women. All of those kinds of things. And we can do a lot towards pushing that and creating the space for equality. And we'll come around to that. But one of the things, and we have CEDAW, which is the convention that eliminates all discrimination against women in this last century. And the United States has passed it, but I mean, they've agreed to it, but they haven't ratified it yet.
I was going to ask, actually,
costly.
How is our government doing? Because like we could talk certainly about all these other bad places, except, quote unquote, but I mean, like, I see a lot of culpability both in our society and our government, and just the law. I mean, the law is not applied equally by any means.
To me, by my way of thinking, as an organizer and an activist for social and economic justice forever, my idea is that we really have to do grassroots work. So with CEDAW, that is something that is being passed now by little local jurisdictions in the country to push. It's when the people lead, the leaders will follow.
Yeah, change comes from the bottom up, that's for sure. I don't see a lot coming down. That's good.
Should we talk about women's activism?
Please.
Don't mourn, organize.
Joe Hill.
Well, you're talking about local activism, and I think being a student at UC Santa Cruz, luckily, there's a lot of local activism that is popping up right now, actually. Specifically, the organization I'm a part of is called SAFE, which stands for Sexual Assault Facts and Education. And they do locally a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, where they do bystander intervention, which is kind of making college students comfortable with, like, we hear all of these horrible stories about, like, in Ohio and Steubenville. And
rape culture right there.
Yeah, and so teaching students how to be a bystander intervening, the different ways you can do that, and providing resources for them. So kind of SAFE allows that dialogue to be on a college campus, which I think is really, really important, just to start discussing it. And they also work with another organization called Men Creating Change, which just got started this year, which is exactly what Jane and I have been talking about, men joining the movement and acknowledging that this is a human rights issue. And then so working in conjunction with the women's organizations and creating that space.
I'm glad to hear that, because I really do feel men need to play a prominent role here. Not at all a background position. This is something that we have to deal with ourselves and be allies.
It's not somebody else's problem, and everybody can have a piece to do in it, making it different. So one of the things that happened in Santa Cruz February of this year, and will hopefully happen again and again, was a day of action around the world called 1 Billion Rising.
Right, I remember that.
I hope many people remember that. We did it in Santa Cruz. It was a fantastic event.
Yes, that happened on February 15th.
February 15th. And we actually have a small highlight about that program internationally, which I think is a great way to segue from the bad news, because there's a little bit of bad news in this, but there's a lot of great news.
Yeah.
And here we go.
So this is the 1 billion rising clip. All right. We'll be right back after this. We're here with Jane Weed-Pomerantz and Nia Shima-Franklin. I do remember it at the Museum of Art and History here in downtown Santa Cruz and worldwide as well. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more about this movement. I mean,
yeah, the great thing is that it's a worldwide movement and it's inclusive of women all over. Like on the college campus we did it too, and my sister did it, she's in high school. So it's like a really, really amazing way to just stand in solidarity really easily. And it's like great, you can see videos from South Africa to like Israel, like anywhere you can think of basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was another wonderful event that also happened in February, and they want to do a yearly report back where women and girls from villages to cities like Brooklyn and then a little back in rural areas of Australia, those people did a survey of their community safety. Was there any lighting in the park? Were the trails cleared enough so that there couldn't be somebody hiding? What is it like for girls and women to just navigate and walk in a town? So they did a survey of safety, and then they appealed to all of their local officials to get it together, to put a light stand in the square with a light at night. to mow down the tall weeds so that people could. So women are starting to come from a place of meaningful discourse. I mean, it is important to them to be able to go to the water hole and bring back water. So why shouldn't they have a safe trail? So they're starting there, and then next year it might be, let's have a school where girls can go, and it builds on that.
Yeah, take little steps.
And I think the 1 Billion Rising is a good example of, like, there's global action and then there's also local action that you can do. And there were some really great agreed conclusions of the Commission on the Status of Women. One was to acknowledge the relationship between illicit trade of small arms and light weapons and the connection to violence against women. And then they also really wanted to address impunity. There were some problems with the agreed conclusions that it didn't really introduce LGBT issues, but that's like something that a lot of grassroots action could try to introduce in other conclusions in the future.
The fire has been lit, and I think that it's inclusive, and that's really important. And as we now shift and talk some more about the good news of what came out of it, I wonder if it makes sense to do Ring the Bell. There's an organization that is called Breakthrough, because you have to understand this is not just this is no longer the fax machine era or the letters. It is instant media, and it's social media, and it's great productions that really speak to people, whether it's soap operas or whether it's billboards or whether it's shorts on TV that stress the message. So there's an organization called Breakthrough, and their campaign is called Ring the Bell.
Okay.
And this is just one, but you can go on YouTube and see many of the others, and they're rarely. It makes sense. It's very cute.
Cool.
Very cool.
So again, just remind folks, if you have any comments about what you've seen or heard tonight, be sure to call us up at 831-425-8844. Here with Jane and Nia talking about the status of women, and we're going to check out this clip, Ring the Bell. We'll be right back after this.
क्या है?
बॉल।
कोई बॉल वॉल?
Bring domestic violence to a halt. Ring the bell.
Powerful stuff there.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the reasons that I loved that one, and they showed a lot, mostly of men intervening.
Yeah, good.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Is that this was children.
Even better.
And you know it affects everyone.
Yeah.
And one of the organizations that I was fascinated with is called the We Can Global Network. And they started with just, start small. And they developed a situation where they can target one person. If that one man in that village refuses to hit his wife or children anymore, he's considered a change maker. And he's given a little toolkit and some acknowledgement. And then his role is to go out and find 10 more people that will also stop beating their wife and children. Wow. And so they have grown. They've started in 2004, and their hope in that first year or so was to have 4 million that would then reach 10 million.
Wow.
That would then reach, would equal 40 million. And so they see it as a mobilization. It's visible, it's coordinated, and they've started to make alliance I mean, it's in like 15 different countries now. But what it has meant is it's a mindset shift, so that now the men that are esteemed in the village are the ones that don't hit.
Right.
It's like the people that are, the leaders are now the ones that are finding other ways to solve problems.
Yeah, and I love it because it's like any man can create change, just like any woman, whether they be young or old, can create change. Men, like in that clip, you saw that the guys were like playing sports and they're doing like, you know, the guy things, and you can like you have the power to create change no matter who you are.
Certainly, and I think it's unfortunate that our kind of society tells us otherwise. You know, we get a lot of rhetoric, but then when we face with the reality, kind of the rubber hits the road. It's a little bit more difficult, but I do think it's wonderful that anything that can inspire people to take action is like a good thing, really. I mean, and that sounds like an excellent program.
And we're also talking about kind of what the U.S. is doing to...
Not enough.
Not enough. But they did, a really great thing that they did is the U.S. signed a draft of this treaty called the Arms Trade Treaty, which is and it was on April 2nd. It's the first of its kind to connect militarization with violence against women. And so the U.S. was one of those nations who signed the treaty, which has a lot more binding language than other drafts. So there's some great change that's going on a global level and on local levels.
Cool. Why don't we talk about local levels a little bit more? I think we've heard...
Well, we'll go global to local because you mentioned earlier and gave a lot of credit to the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom.
Yes.
It is one of the oldest, and in fact, it's going to be 100 years old.
That's awesome.
In 2015.
Yeah.
So they are beginning to organize now the global celebrations of 100 years of activism.
Wow.
And so that's one way to get involved, is to help them celebrate that milestone.
Where can people find more information about Women's International League for Peace and Freedom?
There are websites. There's many branches in many countries. So there's an international WILPF, and then there's a local WILPF, and
we have one right here in Santa Cruz, right?
Each branch sort of chooses the interests that they have.
Yeah.
And here at our local branch, we're looking at the equality in spending. What is that one called?
The discrepancy, like income discrepancy or something?
Well, they're looking at fracking. They've looked at water issues. They've looked at the Middle East issues.
Right.
And then there's the one about no longer allowing corporations to be people.
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
Sounds like good work.
Yeah. So the WILPF here locally does a lot of work and has a lot of committees.
Yeah, and they have a website for the U.S. WILPF. It's wilpfus.org. And something that I would really love to see is more young women in WILPF, because it's kind of an older generation that's really been holding ground. But I think, and what I saw at the CSW, is that there's a lot of young women who are in WILPF. And the great thing about it is it gives you the chance to have a voice at this national level. Like, I was able to advocate for WILPF's needs, and the CSW had these recommendations, and so they were taking it into consideration. And because I was a WILPF member, I had that global power, kind of. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, right on.
That's way
right
awesome.
on.
Yeah.
So there may be a chapter of young WILPF that's going to emerge here.
Awesome. Well, I think that should definitely happen, and I would encourage you to find other students like yourself, such that as you move on in your life, there are people behind to kind of carry forth that legacy, because a lot of student activism, it's like kind of circular and it disappears after a few years. So whatever my advice is worth, find some more younger ladies and mentor them and team them up with Jane and Nancy Abbey and all the other awesome WILPFers out there.
Sandy. And men can be members of WILPF.
Oh, geez. Now I got no excuse.
Yeah, that's right.
I've been to some events.
We're all in it together.
Yeah,
for
I
sure.
love WILPF.
Shout out to Paul Johnson, who was part of WILPF for many years.
We've had him on the show. Yeah, we've had him on the show. Do we want to watch the last clip, or you guys have anything else you want to say, or is there? We're kind of winding down here. I'm concerned about time and want to make sure you get your clip in. If
I wanted
you want to.
Yeah, that this is the last clip is kind of a great ending, and it's very powerful, but it's also very short.
Okay.
And so I wondered if you wanted to talk about the Circle of Six or the Nigerian artist.
Yeah, so the Circle of Six is this cell phone app, which is really great for anyone who has a smartphone, and even if you don't have a smartphone, you can be part of it. Basically what it is it provides an outlet for someone who is experiencing currently sexual assault or feels uncomfortable at like a party or something, and you put 6 friends in your circle of 6, and then you can click this little icon and it'll send out a message to your 6 friends saying that you're in this unsafe situation. Wow. And the theory behind it is that when like you've experienced sexual assault, you want to tell somebody, but after 30 seconds, you want to tell someone less and less, and until like by the time you actually do get in contact with someone, there's so much shame surrounding what happened to you that you don't want to say anything. So it's kind of like immediate intervention through media, which is really cool.
Hopefully prevention.
That sounds like a powerful tool, yeah.
Yeah, and then also...
That's a digital ring the bell, you know? I mean, that's great, yeah.
And then also through media, this cool Liberian hip-hop artist really, because there's a lot of sexual assault of young girls that happens, and he tried to bring that to the table through a song that he wrote, which is called Song for Hawa, and it just talks about how this shouldn't be happening and how men should really be change makers, a lot of what we've been talking about. His name is Takun J, and he's very cool. Takun J, Song for Hawa.
Nice.
Yeah, it's very powerful voices out there.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and do a little shameless self-promotion here and let people know that we have a really awesome group here in town of women and or female-identified, gender non-conforming folks called F-Word. It stands for Feminists Working on Real Democracy. I want to shout out my dear friend Jacqueline Seidel, and she's an intern at the Resource Center for Nonviolence. She's done great work with F-Word, and they hold weekly meetings focusing on organizing, on healing, on lots of great topics. And one of the things they're working on, they've had this whole resist rape culture as a theme of their group. And I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about. You know, the impunity is part of rape culture, like, you know, blaming the victim, men getting away with it, women having so much shame they don't go forward. Like, this is all part of this culture that needs to shift and change. So they're having a speakers panel this Thursday, May 30th, from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Resource Center for Nonviolence. It's going to feature people like Ann Simonton, Erin Ellison, Amma DeLevitt, Jasmine Saidula, Brandon Phillips, Basil Carr, and more. It's going to be men and women talking about rape culture, kind of violence against women, what can we do, how can we do it, get involved, plug in, etc. So again, this Thursday, May 30th, at the Resource Center for Nonviolence, 612 Ocean Street. Yeah, I want to invite you both, and tell your friends. I'll forward you the email, in fact.
That sounds amazing.
Cool.
And I just have to say that one of the things that occurs to me is that, again, as an Adlerian psychologist and a trainer with Positive Discipline Association, we have to be careful that we have to ask for what we do want, not what we don't want.
Yeah.
So yes, we of course want to understand rape culture and we want to resist it. But when we say you must stop rape, we've just introduced the idea.
Yeah.
And so what we really need to ask for is, hey, will you please listen to me more? Or let's show respect to women, and those kinds of things. So if we ask for what we do want, we'll get a greater chance of getting it.
Jacqueline might disagree with you, but I'm not going to argue the point.
I'll talk to Jacqueline.
Okay, you know her, yeah.
So the next clip that we're going to play is a form of kind of alternative empowerment for women. It's this group based in New York that tries to introduce girls through theater and empowerment. And yeah, it's really great and it's really cute and they're really talented. It's crazy.
Okay, well,
it's called Girl Be Heard.
I think we can cut to that clip, yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Are you listening to the sound of my voice? To the words that I'm saying?
To the story I'm telling? Listen up.
It's time for change.
Time to raise awareness about the issues
affecting girls around the world.
Time for girls, all of us, to take the stage.
To tell my story.
My story.
Mi historia. My story.
Through theater. Through dance. Through song. And through action.
It's time to stage a revolution.
Empower others to find their voice. And let a girl be heard.
See Girl Be Heard, formerly Project Girl Performance Collective, in action. Find a show near you and join the movement at girlbeheard.org.
Girl Be Heard. What?
Girl Be Heard. There you go. Again, I'm Sandino Gomez. We've been here with Jane Weed-Pomerantz and Nia Shima-Franklin. I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show, talking about this very important issue, sharing with our community. This is the kind of thing that I'm really proud to be associated with and help promote, and just really thank you for your great work.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. We are Voices from the Village. I want to thank all of the staff and the crew here that helped make this show possible. And I want to again invite you, the viewer, to check out our first ever CTV telethon. Yeah, that's right. You thought those things were like passé. No, we're bringing them back. It's going to be a lot of fun. Friday, June 28th, Saturday, June 29th, live on the air from 6 to 9 p.m. I was just asked to jump in there and help out a little bit, so hopefully, you know, if you're a fan of the show, you'll tune in and donate lots of money, because that's what a telethon's for. Thank you so much. I'm Sandino Gomez. Good night.